Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Zahav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Right. So yesterday we were talking about the issue of using gloves or using a handkerchief around the hands, if it's possible to do that. So now there's another piece here in the tour which talks about המאכיל את חברו, אין המאכיל צריך ליטול והאוכל צריך ליטול. So it's interesting, right? If you're feeding somebody, so who has to wash? The one who's feeding you or the one who's eating? So it says here in the tour, the one who's feeding has to do it, and not the one who's actually eating. So one more time, sorry, maybe I didn't say it right. The one who's eating has to wash, and not the one who's feeding. So you might think, right, that it's the other way around, but not so. So let's see a bit Yosef regarding that. So another thing that we didn't see in the Beit Yosef yesterday, which was that it says here, uh, ומה שכתב רבנו, דאוכל בכף צריך נטילת ידיים, יתברר בסמוך. Right? The Torah said one more thing, which is that um, a person who eats with a spoon, he also needs to wash his hands. So you may think that he doesn't need to. Why? Because he's not touching the food. So come to tell you, no, you have to wash anyway, regardless of how you're eating the food. That's one thing. And then regarding what we just said now, if you're feeding your friend, right, who has to actually do the washing. So it says regarding that, the Bit Yosef, Maskat de Gemara bePerek Kol Basar. This is the conclusion of Gemara there in Kol Basar, which is, as we said in Chulin, אוכל מחמת מאכיל צריך נטילת ידיים, מאכיל עצמו אינו צריך נטילת ידיים. So the one who's feeding doesn't need to wash his hands, and who does? The one who's eating. So this seems to defy logic. Why? Because the one who's feeding you actually is touching the food. Right? All you're doing is just opening your mouth, right? And somebody else is feeding you, but nevertheless, since you're the one who's eating, you have to wash your hands and not the one who's feeding you. That's what it says in the Gemara. Peresh Rabbeinu Yonah, so Rabbeinu Yonah explains the soft perek Elu Dvarim, at the end of this perek, in Membet Amud Aleph. כלומר, אף על פי שאינו נוגע בפת, even though he's not touching the food, as we said, right? The one who's eating. צריך ליטול ידיו. He still has to wash his hands. וגם האחר אין לו להאכילו עד שיטול ידיו. משום דלפני עיוור לא תיתן מכשול. So he says also, the one who's feeding him should not do so without washing his hands. So he says you shouldn't put a stumbling block between before your fellow. אבל מאכיל עצמו, כלומר, המאכיל אין צריך ליטול ידיו. But he says when it comes to the person who's feeding, doesn't need to wash his hands. שאין החיוב אלא על האוכל, because the obligation is only on the one who's eating. והאוכל בכלי נקרא מגרפה. פפי שאינו נוגע בפת, צריך נטילת ידיים. So he says the person who's eating with a utensil, even though he's not touching the food, he still has to wash his hands. וגם הרמב"ם כתב פרק ו' בהלכות ברכות. The Rambam also says, המאכיל לאחרים אינו צריך נטילת ידיים. A person who's feeding others doesn't need to wash his hands. והאוכל צריך נטילת ידיים, but the one who's eating has to wash his hands. אף על פי שאחר נותן לתוך פיו, even though that person is putting it inside his mouth. ואינו נוגע במאכל, he's not touching with the food, והוא הדין לאוכל במגרפה שצריך נטילת ידיים. So he says the same thing also applies if you're eating with a utensil, as we said, right? That you have to wash your hands. So in other words, if you're eating with a fork or whatever, you don't have to wash your hands anyway, even though you're not touching the food. Okay, so it goes on here. כתב רבנו ירוחם, says this rabbi, אם מאכיל לתינוק צריך ליטול ידיו, מפני רוח רע ששורה על הידיים. So the question is like if you're feeding a child, right? Do you have to wash your hands because of the impurity which is on the hands? והרוג התינוק, and he may come to harm the child like that. אם יאכילהו בלא נטילת, if you feed him without washing your hands. כך פשוט בפרק כל הבשר. It says in this perek, like כל הבשר, which is in the Chulin, as we said, קוף זין עמוד ב', וכן ביומא, also in יומא, עין זין עמוד ב', עד כאן. ואיני יודע למה כתבו, מאכיל התינוק צריך ליטול ידיו מפני שרוח רעה. I don't know why they said, right, that you have to wash your hands when you're feeding a child because of impurity, ששורה על הידיים, which is on the hands, ויהרוג התינוק, and he may come to harm the child, אם יאכילהו בלא נטילהו, if he feeds them without washing, כך פשוט בפרק כל הבשר. ואיני יודע למה כתבו מאחר שאין צריכים אנו עכשיו להיזהר בכך. So he says, I don't know why he wrote all these things, because nowadays we don't have to be careful with these things. לפי שאין אותה רוח רעה מצויה בינינו, because that evil spirit, right, that impurity is not found amongst us. כמו שכתבו שם התוספות, like it says in תוספות there. Okay, interesting. Okay, there's a lot of things here to understand, a little bit, right, nuances here. So let's go into the Shulchan Aruch and try to figure this, straighten everything out here, right? There are some contradictory things going on here a little bit. I think I have to bring this up because it's a new chapter. So let's bring it up here. Samir Kima. Okay. It says here, "Hamachil לאחרים אינו צריך נטילת." Again, right? As we mentioned, when you're feeding other people, you don't have to wash your hands. והאוכל צריך נטילת ידיים. But the one who's being fed needs to wash his hands, even though he's not touching the food. That's one thing, right? אף על פי שהאחר נותן לתוך פיו ואינו נוגע במאכל, as we said, והוא הדין לאוכל במגרפה. Same thing, right? Which is, applies to somebody who's eating with a fork. So it's not really the same thing, but anyway, similar, right? That if you're eating with a fork, you're not touching the food. You do have to wash your hands anyway. Because, you may have thought to say, right, since I'm not touching the food, I'll just, not wash my hands and they'll be fine. But we're saying, no, it doesn't work like that. And so why is that, by the way? That's the question. Why is it that when you're not touching the food, you do need to wash your hands anyway? So the answer is because we're afraid that you may come to touch the food. So that's why the rabbi said that regardless of whether you're eating with a fork or a spoon, whatever it is, you have to wash your hands anyway. So yesterday, what were we talking about? That we were talking about eating with gloves and things like this, right? Or with your hands wrapped up. So that we did allow only in a case where there's no other choice. There's no water available, right? And you have to walk a distance, to get the water. We said 18 minutes, right? That was the cutoff threshold. So here we're talking about a case where you do have water. So in a case like that, we're not going to allow you just to, not touch the food and eat and without washing. This is the difference. So says the Rama here, ואסור להאכיל למי שלא נטל ידיו, משום לפני עיוור לא תיתן מכשול. Right. So he says, as we mentioned in the Bet Yosef, that you're not allowed to feed somebody who didn't wash his hands. Why? Because you're putting a stumbling block in front of him. In other words, you're causing him to sin. So what is he talking about here? He's talking about, this guy, right? He doesn't wash his hands, he's negligent. So, we tell him, oh, you don't want to wash your hands? Okay, I'm sorry, I can't feed you. Go to a restaurant, I'm not going to give you any food. What can I do, right? That's the way it goes. Because otherwise you're causing him to stumble. So, so yes, I'm sorry, go ahead. We lost him. Okay, we lost her. Okay. Next time she'll come back. Okay, so anyway, right, that's the story there. Sometimes, these things come up because you're talking about somebody who's not religious, so they don't do these things. They don't wash their hands and they don't and they don't make blessings either, right? Which is also the same problem. Are you allowed to feed somebody who doesn't make blessings? So the answer is no, because you're causing him to sin. So sometimes this can be difficult in our times, because it may cause hostility towards people. Uh, so we have to explain to them that I'm sorry, I can't feed you if you don't bless, if you don't wash your hands. It's a little bit difficult to swallow in our times, but okay, so that's the end of the chapter here. So just to recap, right, this whole chapter, we learned several things over here, right? Starting yesterday and up to today. The first thing was we said, right, when you don't have water, so we only allow you to eat, with the covering your hands if there's no water available for, 18 minutes, up to 18 minutes to walk, whatever, to travel. Then you can do that. Otherwise, we don't allow you to do that. So we said, right, apparently that means that on the plane you have to wash your hands if you want to eat bread. Or, if you just want to avoid it altogether. So don't eat bread, just have some other stuff. Eat pasta, eat rice, whatever, right? And then you'll solve the problem with that also. Whatever, it's up to you, right? Whatever you want to do. There's also a whole discussion, about these roles that they serve in the airlines. If they're like mezonot or if they're hamotzi, what are they made out of and how they make them and so forth and so on. So there's a machloket, amongst the rabbis, whether those rolls are hamotzi or they're mezonot. So some say you can just make mezonot on them, and that's okay. But some others say not so, because after all, it's just a piece of bread, and you're having a meal with it, So there's really no excuse to eat that without making hamotzi and washing. So what's the halacha? It's I can't tell you, I personally, my humble opinion, I think that you have to wash for these things because what you're eating is basically a meal. It's not really a snack what they give you over there. It's just like a small meal. Not exactly a snack. Okay, it's a discussion, but seems to be the more reasonable approach to this whole thing. That was the first thing, and then we learned after that, right just now, is that when you're feeding somebody. Right. Who has to wash? The feeder or the eater, right? So we said the eater has to wash, even though he's not touching the food. But the feeder, even though he is touching the food, does not have to wash his hands. So, you find this with, sometimes with children, somebody's feeding the child, or you could find it also with like, somebody who's old or sick. He's being fed by somebody. But, so who has to wash, right? Again, it's the same idea. The one who's eating has to wash, not the one who's feeding. Okay. And then again, we said, right, to reiterate that if you're eating with a fork or whatever, some spoon, you do have to wash. So that doesn't absolve you. And also, we said, right, if he's not going to wash your fellow Jew, don't feed him. Right? Tell him, I'm sorry, can't feed you. You don't wash your hands. Sorry. Yeah, maybe we should look at the Mishnah Berurah about that. See what he says about this very interesting issue here, which is a very common issue today. So it says Mishnah Berurah one thing, right? If you know for sure he didn't wash, then you shouldn't feed him. But if it's a doubt, then you can. That's one thing. Let's see what else he has to say here. Okay, whatever. So I guess we'll go to the next chapter. This was a short chapter. So now we'll go to Kuf Samech Daled, which is the second to last chapter in this topic. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Actually, we already spoke about this one time, but now it's coming to the its main place. Its main source is over here. There's one more thing before we go on. I wanted to address here in this bit Yosef, which it seems like we didn't cover in the. Yeah, this is worth addressing. If you just give me a chance for a second, I want to tell you about this issue here because he brought in the bit Yosef something which is in the name of the Rabbeinu Yerucham, that if you're feeding a child and so now the question is, right, again, who has to wash, right, the child or you? So here, he writes, Rabbeinu Yerucham, that the one who's feeding also has to wash. Why is that? Because there's an evil spirit that rests on his hands, and this could cause him to kill the child. So where's the source for this? So he brings Kol Basar, right, in Chulin. Um, so some comes a bit Yosef and comments on this. So he says, I don't know why he mentioned this thing, Rabbi Yerucham, right? Why is that? Because nowadays, right, this evil spirit is not found amongst us. So what does that mean? According to this opinion, which is brought in the name of the Tosfot, Ruach Ra, this evil spirit, doesn't exist anymore, like it used to in the old days, the times of the Talmud or whatever, before or whatever. So Tosfot already wrote that we don't have this now in our times. So then, you have to ask the question, what about when you're washing your hands in the morning? Right? Is there Ruach Ra? Is there evil spirit on the hands or not? According to this, apparently it seems like there isn't. But what we say, it seems like we say that it's not as strong as it used to be, this ruach ra, this evil spirit, but there's still something there, like a reduced level of it. So why do we mention this? Because that reduced level that we have today is not really going to kill anybody. It's not, it's not so strong like that. So we don't really have like a danger of death, of somebody who's not washing his hands, like we had in the old days. But in the old days, the ruach ra was so strong that it could kill somebody. So comes in Bet Yosef and tells you that we don't have today, that level of ruach ra. We're not there. So I wanted to mention that because it's an important concept to understand that we don't really hold by this in our times, this ruach ra business, as much as we used to in the old days. But we do say when you wake up in the morning, you have to wash your hands because of ruach ra. So what does that mean? There is some evil spirit there, but not on the level that it used to be before. There was like a killer. Not on that level. Okay, I just wanted to mention that before we go on. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll move on. So here, right, the tour says something which as we said, we already mentioned this before, but now it's the main place over here. What are we talking about? Amar Rav, notel adam yadav shachrit matnei lehem kol hayom. So Rav says in the Talmud, Masechet Brachot, that a person can wash his hands in the morning and make a condition on this. What does that mean? That he's going to guard his hands all day, and this way he won't have to wash his hands again all day. What does that mean? If he's going to want to eat, let's say, a meal, right, some breakfast or lunch or whatever it may be, he won't have to wash his hands anymore. He can rely on the washing that he did in the morning. Why is that? Because he conditioned that while he washed that, oh, yeah, I'm going to be guarding my hands. So, I'll make sure that they don't become impure. And that does the job, according to the Talmud. It's exactly what we're saying over here. So that's interesting because um, so the question, is like, why don't we do that today? Nobody does this today. So, first of all, you have to know one thing, right? That if you go to use the bathroom, right, that's it. You're done with that. That there's no more, there's no more guarding the hands anymore. Once you went to the bathroom, so now you have to wash your hands again. So we're talking about if you can, go all day without going to the bathroom, then this could, apply in theory. But otherwise, not so, because how's it going to apply if you go to the bathroom, right? That's it. You're done with that. You didn't guard your hands anymore. So it's only when you're really guarding your hands, meaning what? That you're always cognizant of the fact that you cannot make them impure. And once you go to the bathroom, you're done. That's one thing. But also, today some of us are very, absent-minded, and we don't have such good focus. So, meaning that because of that, a person could lose his focus, and make his hands impure. And that's why you don't find today, that people do this because we're just not able to do it, practically speaking, to make this condition like that. Okay, but we'll see anyway, right? What the poskim say regarding this. It's an interesting topic. So let's take a look at the Bet Yosef. Just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Yeah. Open the window. It's a little bit stuffy. Okay. So as we said, it says Bet Yosef over here, but Perek Kol Basar, right? Where is the source for this? Also in Kuf Vav עמוד ב' in חולין, ויתמר הלאה בגמרא, it says in גמרא קז עמוד א', אמר לו רבי אבינה, לבני פקתא דערבות, כגון אתון דלא שכיחי לכו מאיה, משהו יודייכו בצפרא, ואתנו עליי, right? So says the Rav to the people of this certain place, he tells them like this, you guys, don't have a lot of water, you have a shortage of water. So therefore, what you should do is, do like this: make a condition in the morning, wash your hands, and say, you know what, I'm going to guard my hands all day, right? And this way, you won't have to wash your hands all day. As we said, right, until you have to use a bathroom, right? Then you're going to have a problem. That's for sure. Okay, so that's what he told them to do. דאמרי בשעת הדחק אין שלא, אין ושלא בשעת הדחק לא, ופליגה דרב, ויקה דאמרי, so, right, but some say this only applies like in a time of need, when there's no other choice. אפילו שלא בשעת הדחק נמי דהי, and some say you can even do this when there's no, right, pressing situation. Even there you can do it. וכתב הראש, דאבדינן, כי היי לישנא דלא פליגה דרב. So he says, we do like this, the Rosh says, we do like the opinion which doesn't argue with Rav. וכן כתב שם הרשב"א, so the Rashba says, וכן כתב גם רבנו יונה, also רבנו יונה says this, בסוף פרק אלו דברים, right, in מ"א עמוד ב', דתכיוון דנטילת דרבנן בשל סופרים מלך אחר מקל. So since washing the hands is rabbinical, we go lenient, right? So in other words, we go like the lenient opinion. So therefore, we do allow you to do this, when there's when there's a good reason why you want to do that. וכן יראה שהוא דעת הרמב"ם. The Rambam also seems to say like that. ברכות, פרק ו', laws of blessings. שכתב דין זה, he writes this הלכה, סתם, ולא חילק בין שעת הדחק ולא שעת הדחק. He didn't differentiate between a time of need or not a time of need. Rabbeinu Hananel pasak Elishna de Machmir. So Rabbeinu Hananel paskins like the stringent opinion, but Tamu alav Rabbeinu Yonah Rashba. So these rabbis were, wondering about him, why he did that. Katav Rabbeinu Yonah says Rabbeinu Shliyesh Samach al Ma'ishit Damina beGemara. It seems like he was relying on what we say in the Gemara. The Maim Rishonim Echilu Achazir Mipnei Achashasha Zo Sheme Yavo Leachilo Machal Asur Kishire Sheino Notel Yadav Pesak. להחמיר שאינו להתנות כן, אלא בשעת הדחק, לא עניין הלכה, כמעט יכול לנו רבת הפליגי על רבנו חננאל לתקנה כמתיו. So it says, right, that Rabbeinu Hananel is the only one who really goes this way, that he's stringent about this. All the other poskim are lenient. So therefore the rule is that we do allow you to do this even though it's not a pressing time. Okay, interesting. Goes on. Mashkatav Rabbeinu b'shem Sefer Mitzvot. That what Rabbeinu said in the name of the Sefer Mitzvot. The Shon Samag. Right, language of the Samag. Kachu posek Rabbeinu Ravina. That's how Ravina paskin. Shenotel yadam yadav shachrit matnei aleim kol hayam. A person can do this, right, to make a condition when he washes in the morning. Kulo ika de'amre davka b'shat adchak. Some say this only applies to a pressing situation. Ve'im achar sheitna nizdamna lo mayim. So if after he right, he made a condition, then he got some water, umbarech notel barach, he should wash and also bless. Some say this applies even when it's not a pressing situation. Ve'olchei drachim shatat chakhi, right? So he says, but people who are traveling, right, it is considered a pressing situation. So therefore, if after he did this in the morning, he got some water, so he shouldn't bless because he already fulfills obligation. But by the way, you see from here something interesting, which would be probably a solution, for the plane, which is that, a person should wash his hands before he goes on the plane, and say, I'm going to use this washing for the whole flight, until, as we said, right, until you use the bathroom. That's going to kill it. But until then, right, you could. So that means if they serve you a meal, right, you could, eat without washing because you already washed before you get on the plane.
So what invalidates the washing? I mean, isn't it like if you touch your face, you touch your hair? I mean, doesn't
Right,
that
so the
invalidate?
face is not really a problem, right? But we're talking about, the things which make your hands impure, like, touching the covered parts of the body, or scratching your hair, or, going to the bathroom, right? That's definitely going to kill it. You know what I mean? Things like that, right? But besides that, you're good.
I'd still be washing my hands for
I'm
sure.
sorry?
So I would still be washing my hands for sure, especially on a plane. All right, I have many questions. So
Yeah, I
let me.
see. I see the point. But anyway, right? Sometimes this can be useful, this concept, for a person who has a need. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand something correctly. I'm sorry, I was in the car. I would have asked this sooner, um, but couldn't do. Anyway, when we talk about like if you use a utensil or you're using a fork or something like that, we talked about like in a time of great need you can use gloves if you didn't have water.
Yes,
They
right.
don't mean that you can use a fork instead of like at a time, if you don't have
Yeah, so the
water.
truth is, the gloves and the fork is the same thing, really.
I thought you said it wasn't because you might pick up the food.
The difference is like this. Yeah, so the difference is that we only allow you to do it when there's no other choice. So what
Okay,
does that mean? You have no water.
all right, so there's
But
no water. You could even just use a fork.
right, that would be the same thing as gloves.
I see. And then
Yeah.
what about, does this only have to do with Natalia Yadayim, not Maya Machronim?
So yeah, so what's the question with my machronim?
So if you're not touching the food, do you still have to wash for Maya Machronim?
Ah, okay, yeah, I see the question. Okay, I got it. Uh, the truth is, that if you have water, you should do it anyway. Yes, you should do it, even though your hands are clean.
Okay, and one more question.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
by the way, the Ashkenazim are more lenient about that a little bit, with my machronim.
okay. Um,
We're
if
not so lenient with that, we're like we go straight with that.
if a person's feeding like their relative or their child or their elderly parent or something like that, do
Right.
they still make the blessings for their parent or their child?
Right. Yeah, so the truth is, right, the one who's eating has to make the blessing because he's the one who's, getting the benefit. You know what I mean?
What if they can't?
Oh, okay. So, so yeah, you don't have to bless for the child. There's no point in that because you're not the one who's eating. So what are you blessing on? What's. You can't transfer your blessing to somebody else. You know what I mean? Because you're not the one who's enjoying it. So there's no point in that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's the story. Okay, let's go on a little bit. מלכתחילה אחר שני ראשונות והולכי דרכים בשעת הדרך גרעין, מדייק רבנו שנראה שפוסק לישנא גדלו דלא שער אלא בשעת הדחק. So he says, right, that Rabbeinu, the Torah, seems to understand that you should only do it in pressing time. מה שכתב רבנו בשם רבנו פרץ, הוא בסמ"ק, בזה לשונו, נוטל אדם ידיו. So this also, Rabbeinu Peretz, he brought, right, that he says that a person can wash yadav shachit in the morning, as we said, right, matnei lehem kol hayom kulo, and you can condition that all day. Okay. So he says, right, there's a gloss over there on this piece. He says there, right, that this is what the travelers, rely on. Right, so when they travel, they don't wash their hands. Why? Because they're relying on the washing that they did, in the morning, whatever, right? וחשבנו לא שכיחי מיה, and they're right, there's no water there in the where they're traveling. לפי שהם דרך, because they're on the road. אמנם אם יימצא להם מים בתוך פרסה, יש להמתין, right? But it says if they're going to have water within a parsa, which is 72 minutes, they should wait, he says, כדאמרינן נטילת ידיים, like we says with washing hands, that מילין, it's 4 מילין, ויש מפרשים, דהתנא שחרית, כדאי דמינין וצריך עיון. ודווקא, אוקיי, so דווקא היכא דלא שכיחה, מה דווקא שחרית דווקא שלא יטנפו. So that's only if there's no water found in that place. And also it says only in the morning. And also, as long as they don't get dirty, right, the hands. והגאות מימוניות כתבו כל דברי סמ"ק והגעתו במקום, ויש מפרשים כתוב לפי שיש מפרשים שהיא גרסה נכונה. So, yeah, so he's telling you, right, that there are certain different versions of this red teaching, in different places. So basically, right, what does it hinge on? The question is, should you do this lechatchila or only in a pressing need? ומה שכתב רבנו פרץ דווקא שחרית למדו מדברי התוספות שכתבו, right? Also, רבנו פרץ says this only applies in the morning. They learn from תוספות שכתבו שם נוטל אדם ידיו שחרית ומתניע להם כל היום תמה ודמינן פרק ערי פסחים נוטל ידיו לא יקדש משום תקידוש מפסיק בין נטילת ידיים לסעודה. So it says, right, that there's a wonder about this. Why? Tosfot asks, because it says in Psachim that a person who washes, you shouldn't make kiddush, right? Mishum the kiddush mafsik ben netilat yad seuda, because the kiddush interposes between, right, the washing and the seuda. Ve'aminam bepek elu dvarim. So we said in this perek brachot nun bet amud aleph mozgin et hakos ve'achar kach notin. First we write pour out the cup and then we wash the hands. Mishum de techef netilat yadayim seuda, because we want to have right after the washing the seuda, the meal. Ve'ashta ha mo'il tanai afilu kol hayom. So he says, therefore you see, right, that that this condition works all day. ואומר רבנו תם, says רבנו תם, דהנה מילה כשמתנה שחרית. That's only if you do in the morning. ויודע שלמה, דאף אגב דמועיל תנאי לרב, that which we said, right, that this condition works with Rav, according to Rav, אף שלא בשעת הדחק, even though it's not a pressing need. היינו אם אין מים בסמוך, right, that's only if there's no water around. אין עמי יש לו צריך, or alternatively I can tell you that there is, וצריך דברים אחרים, but he needs the water for some other purposes, right? Ad kan, Samach Rabbeinu Peretz al Tirutza Kama. So Rabbeinu Peretz, right, went according to the first answer here. Lomar de lo mehane tanai ela dafka kishematnet v'shachrit, right? So he says it only works when you do it in the morning. You make a condition like that. Rabbeinu Yono Perek elu dvarim tiretz ma. Rabbeinu Yono says, right, ma sheiksha atosot. That what Tosfot asked over here. Question. But it's not mozgin et hakos, that it says, right, that we should first pour out a cup and then we wash the hands. Ta'atam shelo itna netilat shachrit. That's because he didn't make a condition when you wash in the morning. Mitchayev litor b'shat achila. So therefore, he was obligated to do it at the time of eating. B'zeh amru techef netilat seuda. So regarding that, they said, right, that you have to do the washing right close to the right next to the meal. Since he's washing his hands to eat, so he should eat right away. So he shouldn't make some kind of interruption in between. He shouldn't divert his mind. But he says a person who's not obligated to wash at the time of eating, because he guarded from the morning, and he made a condition. So they didn't say regarding that you have to do the eating and the washing one next to the other. So it seems like this, he says it could be that this was actually the intention of Rabbeinu Tam as well. That it only applies when he makes a condition in the morning. The person who doesn't do it at the time of eating is called in the morning. So that is because otherwise, what will be the differentiate between the morning or some other time of the day? You make a condition like that. לומר דבשחרית מהנה בשאר היום לא מהנה. Yeah, so in other words, he's telling you, right, it shouldn't make any difference when you do this. It could be in the morning, it could be also in the middle of the day or in the afternoon. What difference does it make? It's all the same. Makes sense. That's what I was saying before, that it shouldn't really make any difference when you do this. You can do this anytime. The Alma Shikshu Tosfot, and that which Tosfot asked the question, when Kadesh Tiretz, Rabbeinu Yonah, the Rabbeinu Yonah answers is Perek Elu Dvarim Shemin Adin Sagina Matilat Rishona. That really record the Ramino says it's good enough to do the first washing. But since the rabbi said to do the kiddush first, and he didn't do so. So they penalize him to do it again to wash his hands. Samak. And that what she said in the Samak, in the Hagot of the Samak. That if he finds water within Parsa, yes, he should wait. This was also in Mordechai. So we have here several opinions, about this whole thing. How this works exactly. Very interesting. Okay. Um, so then the Torah, right, says further on regarding this. But the Torah says the Rosh allows this even when there's no pressing need to do this condition like this. However, Rashi explains but you have to be careful, right? Not to make the hands dirty or whatever impure. If you did that, but you actually obviously you lost your condition there. So he says, and that which Rabbeinu Peretz said, right, that this only applies when there's no water, right? Adonai Rabbi Yosef, but the Rosh doesn't agree with that, right? He says this applies also even if you have water. So, in other words, I'm always like thinking about this. This is always on my mind regarding the issue of the plane, right? So, according to what he's saying here in the name of the Rosh, it seems like you can do this for the plane, to make this condition, and then you go up on the plane, and as long as you didn't go to the bathroom, you could have a meal without washing because you washed before you went up on the plane. You boarded on the plane, so I think that would be a pretty decent idea. Let's see. We'll see this until the end, right? What the bottom line is in the Shulchan Aruch. But it seems like it works. This okay, that makes me happy. I always have a dilemma on the plane, like what do you do? Like what do you do? Okay, so anyway, let's continue. There's a little bit more left. It's almost done. Rambam also writes like this. He also says the same thing as the Rosh, right? As long as you don't divert your mind from your hands and you're guarding them, it's good, no problem, right? Right? So he also says, right, the Kolbo, that if you put gloves, it's also good, right? So you know what he's talking about here? You wash your hands, right? And in order to guard them from getting dirty or getting impure, you put gloves on, right? This way you won't touch your hands with anything bad. So that's one way to guard your hands, to put gloves. Today we have we have those latex gloves, right? Those or the ones, the plastic, whatever, right? All that stuff that we have today, those right, disposable gloves. And so you could put one of those, and that would be fine. You wash your hands, put on the latex, and you're good to go. But the truth is, you don't really need the gloves, Even without the gloves, you could guard your hands, but it just makes it easier to guard them.
And what if your hands sweat with these latex gloves? What happens?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean they will sweat, but the sweat is not really the issue here. The issue is, becoming impure.
So the sweat on the hands does not make the hands impure.
Not really. No, we never found that. That we don't have. There's no source for that.
Okay. Thank you, Golda.
Yeah. God bless. Okay. So anyway, right. Let's move on here a little bit. כתב רשב"א, says רשב"א, פרק כל הבשר, פירש רש"י, בלבד שייזהר מטנפם, he also says the same thing, right? Be careful not to dirty them. ממנה אתה למד שמי שנטל ידיו שלא על דת אכילה, אפילו בשעת צריך נטילת ידיים. Right, so he says, but you see from there that a person will just wash his hands, and his intention was not to eat, אפילו לשעת צריך נטילת ידיים. So then you do need to wash when you eat. על שם האכילה. עד כאן. וכבר כתבתי בסימן קנ"ט, this is I already wrote in the chapter 159, שהרשב"א סובר שנוטל ידיו צריך שיכוון שהוא נוטל לאכילה והערכתי. So, right, because the Rashba holds, right, he says that when you wash your hands, you have to have intention to eat. If you want to eat, you have to have that intention. ורקתי שם בדבר, so I spoke at length about that. כתב מרדכי פרק אלו דברים, says מרדכי, דווקא כשנזהר כל היום שלא תנפם, right? That's only if, as we said again, right? Same thing. He's careful not to, dirty them. אבל אם תנפם, but if he dirtied his hands, right? Made his hands impure, אין מועיל התנאי. So then the condition doesn't work, obviously, right? It only works on condition you kept them clean. כי אם איכה שאין מים בעיר, so it says, unless you don't have any water in the town, vika torach lebakeshin. They're right. There's a sort of a difficult to ask for water from other people, whatever. Okay, so mashma de midvarav. So it implies from his words, she'enet mayim nimtzaim elad betorach. So that means that water, you can get the water, but it's hard, like it's a little bit it's cumbersome. Afal pishatin fam mo'ila tanai. So then, right, even if he dirtied his hands, it would help. וכבר כתבתי טעמו בסימן קנ"ח. So I already wrote this reasoning in chapter 158. Okay, whatever. So we'll do the Shulchan Aruch and we'll stop. There's another one here, but we'll do that next time. So it is interesting, really. But now we're going to see the bottom line, right? From all this discussion, we saw so many little variables here, right? Tons of stuff. Okay, so he says like this in Shulchan Aruch, right? נוטל אדם ידיו שאחרית ומתנה עליהם כל היום. So as we said, right, a person can wash his hands in the morning. He makes a condition, right? By the way, it doesn't mean he has to say it. Just thinking is good enough. We never said he has to say anything. I will guard my hands. Like so. You don't have to say that. Just think about it. That's good enough, right? That's what it means. Right? But here's the thing, right? On condition that you don't, divert your mind from that, right? You have to always be cognizant of guarding your hands. I personally, by the way, I'm always cognizant of that. Like I'm always watching out for that. That's my nature. I don't know, whatever. I'm sort of like, fastidious, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. Right? So I'm always watching out. I always know, that if I put my hands where they shouldn't be, I'm gonna have to go and wash them. So my mind is always on that. It's a habit, once you get habituated, you think that way. It's a mentality. Okay, whatever. But anyway, right? So if you're that kind of person who can, be cognizant and wash keep your hands from getting dirty and stuff, so you're good to go, right? Right. So it says if you do have water, it's good. He says to wash, again. But don't bless, why? Because you're not really obligated. You know what I mean? So if you have a chance to wash again, for the meal, it's a good idea to do it, but you're not obligated to do it, but good idea. But don't bless because you're not really obligated. That's what he says.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So actually, I ran into a situation today. I was in the Goldberg's Bagels and getting a bialy, and I went to wash, and I washed, and then after I was done saying the blessing, there were no towels.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's like, what is the option there?
Yeah. So in other words, you're saying, can you eat with wet hands? That's your question?
Can I shake them dry? Can I wipe them on my pants? I mean, like,
Yeah, you can do. Yeah, you can use your clothing. That will be fine. Whatever. You
like
know.
freaking out, like
But
there's no
I think we already said, if I'm not mistaken, right, that if you put a brevi, you're good.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Even if you don't dry them.
That
Do
was
you
totally
remember
right.
do you recall what I'm telling you?
I do. Yeah, I did use a Rabbi,
Okay.
but
Yeah. So
it's
yeah,
just
if you do Revit, I think you're good without drying even.
okay. All right, great, thanks.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Or you could just, whatever, use anything you can, get your hands on, right? Like we already said, some people dry their hands, on the wall. That it's all good, whatever you can do, right?
That's disgusting. No,
Maybe you want to use the tree, I don't know, God knows, whatever it is, right? Okay.
I'd rather like my
Okay.
little
Anyway,
touch.
right? Okay. People can be very creative with these things. You can maybe use your keeper, if you're a guy, whatever. Okay, whatever.
Or dry. I mean, I just wonder if you can't,
Okay.
you don't have
So
something to dry.
that's the story there. So let's see the Ramah here, and we're done, right? So it says here, "V'had mehane tanai dafka benetilat she'ena tzarich ha'achila," right? Right. So he says that which we say that a condition like this, works. That's if it's not a need for the right for eating. Dumya denetilat shachit, like in the morning. But if you're washing for the sake of eating, right? So he says there, that condition will not help you. He brings this from right the Bet Yosef, which I don't think we saw this Bet Yosef, whatever, or maybe we saw it, but we didn't paskin like it. But anyway, right? It seems like we don't paskin like this. This Sfardim, we don't paskin like this. But anyway, it's not very restrictive what he's saying here, But it's telling you only what he's saying is like this, Rama, right? Just to explain to you. What he's saying is that if you're washing your hands for the sake of eating now, right? It's not going to help you all day, this washing. I don't really see why that should be that. I don't see why that should be, but anyway, right? It's it is what it is. So okay, so anyway, right? That's the Shulchan Aruch. So this can be useful. We don't really do this much today. It's not something very common. But if you have a good reason why you want to do this, as we said, right? Going up on the plane, whatever things like this, or you're traveling, and you can't wash your hands. There's no water on the road, right? And you don't want to use your drinking water, because you want to drink also. You know what I mean? So this would be a good way to to solve that problem, and you know especially if you put like the latex on, then you're really good, right? Because that guards your hands. Okay, whatever, it's all good.
If you were planning on eating, I don't know, toast for breakfast or something, and you washed your hands for the morning blessing, whatever, you could like you can't count that for your food.
Yeah, you can. That's exactly what we're saying. That morning washing you can use all day, right? Until the point where you got your hands dirty, right? Or you went to the bathroom, as we said, right? Obviously, that's going to kill it. You know what I mean?
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, God bless. So thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. I took down my sukkah today, so I was like really really tired, and so I wasn't even sure if I could do this class tonight, but I got my energy up, to do it. I really tried. So Baruch Hashem came out good. We got through it. Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem. God bless. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov Chazak Baruch. Keep praying for our valiant soldiers who are doing an incredible job
Thank you
destroying
so
all
much.
the Nazis. Baruch Hashem. Ishtabach Shalom.
Thank you.
Wiping out the Nazis.
Thank you, Kabbalah.
God bless.